Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: even with flames abroad, Biden keeps one eye on the home front. Republican challenger uses forum to try to nationalize Kentucky governor's race. Another hostage crisis bedevils an American president. Trump criticizes Netanyahu over Hamas attack, calls Hezbollah smart. Texas company paid $75 million in 1 year to bus migrants out of state. Even with flames abroad, Biden keeps one eye on the home front. New York Times. U.S. President Joe Biden's domestic agenda is continuing despite the ongoing international crisis in the Middle East. Biden has vowed to protect Americans from exploitation by imposing regulations on hidden charges from airlines, banks, concert ticket sellers, and other retailers. The Biden administration has calculated that voters in the U.S., concerned with pocketbook issues, will decide his re-election primarily on domestic policies rather than international conflicts. Although Biden's day is often consumed by foreign issues, his message to constituents remains focused on matters he believes are more directly related to their lives. Biden's focus on domestic issues is reflected in his recent speeches and meetings, addressing economic policies and job creation. The administration is mindful of the risk of appearing too focused on international relations, as former President George H.W. Bush lost re-election in 1992 when voters thought he was not paying enough attention to a recession. Republican challenger uses forum to try to nationalize Kentucky governor's race. Associated Press. Republican Attorney General Daniel Cameron tried pushing national politics to the forefront of the governor's race in GOP-trending Kentucky, while Democratic Governor Andy Beshear played up the state's record-setting economic growth under his leadership as the rivals squared off at a forum Thursday. Another hostage crisis bedevils an American president. Yahoo! There is a growing crisis in Gaza as the number of U.S. citizens being held hostage by Hamas increases. There are currently an estimated 14 U.S. passport holders missing in the region. President Joe Biden, who has been working on the issue of American hostages, has said, "I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world." Meanwhile, the U.S. and Qatari governments have reportedly agreed to refreeze $6 billion in oil revenue that Iran had access to spend on humanitarian concerns, in exchange for the return of 5 Iranian-American hostages held in the Islamic Republic. The U.S. has special forces trained in hostage extraction in the region, but there are currently no plans to send them on a rescue mission. Israel has blamed the Iranian government for the crisis, saying the money for hostages scheme has helped finance Hamas. The U.S. hostages are being used as human shields by Hamas to prevent Israel from destroying critical infrastructure and to gain leverage over Washington. Trump criticizes Netanyahu over Hamas attack, calls Hezbollah smart. CBC. Israel and the White House have criticized former U.S. President Donald Trump for praising Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militant group, and a sworn enemy of Israel. Trump also criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the recent attack by Palestinian Hamas militants. Israeli Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi called Trump's comments shameful and accused him of spreading propaganda. The White House called the comments dangerous and unhinged. Trump is currently the frontrunner to become the Republican Party's 2024 presidential nominee. Texas company paid $75 million in 1 year to bus migrants out of state. The Independent. Texas has paid over $75 million to a private company, Wind Transportation, to transport migrants out of the state and into sanctuary cities across the country. The payments were made from August 2022 through August 2023. Texas Governor Greg Abbott launched the Border Bus Mission in April 2022 to provide support to overwhelmed border communities. The state has bused over 54,000 migrants to self-declared sanctuary cities since then. However, some cities are strained for resources and have warned that they are reaching capacity. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has asked for federal assistance as the migrant crisis in his state is overwhelming. A Zionist in my heart, Joe Biden's devotion to Israel faces a new test. The Toronto Star. U.S. President Joe Biden's support for Israel, which has remained solid over the years, could be tested if Israel launches an incursion into Gaza, where Hamas is headquartered. For now, Biden has offered only vague admonitions that Israel should follow the rules of war. Instead, Biden's focus has been on demonstrating unshakable solidarity with Israel, including his remarks during a White House meeting with Jewish leaders to talk about combating anti-Semitism. Biden's commitment could be tested if Israel launches an incursion into Gaza, where Hamas is headquartered, in a military operation that would compound the suffering already experienced by Palestinians facing waves of retaliatory bombardment. Biden meets with CEOs on economy as inflation stays hot. Bloomberg. The White House has asked executives at a meeting with President Joe Biden to be prepared to discuss the U.S. economy, which has shown signs of strain. Consumer prices have remained firm, causing a decline in employee pay and weekly earnings. The United Auto Workers strike has also escalated, while a Gallup survey showed that respondents believed Republicans would do a better job of keeping the country prosperous than Democrats. The meeting comes after a strong September jobs report, and executives plan to push Biden on ways to strengthen the economy. U.S. and Qatar agree to prevent dispersal of recently unfrozen Iranian funds as Israel-Hamas war rages. The Toronto Star. The U.S. and Qatar have reached an agreement that Qatar will not act on any request from Tehran for the time being to access $6 billion in Iranian funds that were unblocked as part of a prisoner swap last month, a U.S. official has said. The move, which stops short of a full refreezing of Iranian funds in Qatar's banking system, follows the deadly attacks by Hamas on Israel and continued Republican criticism of the Biden administration's deal with Iran, in which $6 billion was unfrozen in exchange for the release of 5 detained Americans. U.S. officials have strenuously pushed back against the criticism, noting that the money had yet to be spent by Iran and can only be used for humanitarian needs. The U.S. is moving quickly to boost Israel's military. A look at what assistance it's providing. The Toronto Star. The U.S. is providing personnel and munitions to Israel to help them respond to the recent attack by Hamas. A special operations cell has been tasked with intelligence and planning, while the U.S. is also expediting weapons orders by Israel and providing additional munitions for its Iron Dome air defense system. The U.S. is also sending warships and aircraft to the region to establish a force presence that deters other groups from taking advantage of the situation. CNN poll. Americans' views of the Republican Party and its congressional leaders have worsened amid House leadership crisis. CNN. A new CNN poll conducted by SSRS shows that the public's impressions of the Republican Party and its leaders in Congress have worsened amid a leadership crisis in the House of Representatives. According to the poll, the public continues to prefer the Republican Party's leadership to that from the White House, with 54% expressing more confidence in Republicans in Congress than in President Joe Biden. However, half of Americans approve of the removal of Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. Republican-aligned Americans are divided over how the GOP should govern, with Trump supporters more likely to feel unrepresented by the government and less likely to consider continued Ukraine aid important. Trump has widened his lead in the race for the Republican Party's 2024 presidential nomination, with 58% of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters supporting him. The poll also found that impressions of the Republican Party among the public are deeply negative, with 52% having a negative impression of the party overall. Democrats are also facing challenges, with just 35% approving of the way Democratic leaders in Congress are handling their jobs. Donald Trump returning to civil trial next week with fixer-turned-foe Michael Cohen set to testify. Associated Press. Donald Trump will attend his New York civil fraud trial next week, according to a person familiar with the former president's plans. The trial is a potential face-to-face showdown between Trump and Michael Cohen, who is expected to testify. Trump voluntarily attended the first 3 days of the trial last week. The trial is a civil fraud lawsuit brought by the New York Attorney General's office. The office alleges that Trump, his company and top executives deceived banks, insurers, and others by overvaluing his assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork. A message: why has Biden dispatched a U.S. strike group during Gaza war? Al Jazeera. The U.S. has moved one of its largest aircraft carriers and a strike group to the eastern Mediterranean as the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza. U.S. officials have said that the move is aimed at deterring Hezbollah and Iran from taking advantage of the situation. Although the US has threatened to enter the war on Israel's side, analysts believe it is highly unlikely that the US military would directly take part in the hostilities. The move is seen as a way to buttress deterrence and send a strong signal to Hezbollah and Iran that the US would intervene militarily if necessary. However, experts believe that a US military intervention is far-fetched, and that the US is primarily signaling its support for Israel. The arrival of the aircraft carrier is seen as major political and strategic signaling, but it is unlikely that the US would enter into a war in the Middle East, especially as President Biden is entering an election year and has political constraints. Migrants flounder in Colombian migration point without the money to go on. Associated Press. Migrants stranded in the Colombian town of Necoclí are struggling to find the funds necessary to continue their journey to the US, which involves crossing the treacherous Darien Gap jungle. Many migrants have exhausted their savings and are unable to gather the required $1,000 in Colombian pesos to continue. The local economy in Necoclí has shifted to cater to migrants who sell basic necessities or ask for help to gather funds. The town has become a hub for migrants, mostly Venezuelans, who are now stuck and unable to move forward. As Israel's war against Hamas escalates, US sends a warning to Iran, raising fears of a recession. ABC. The Biden administration has sent a clear message to Iran's regime to exercise caution as fears mount over Tehran's involvement in the Israel-Gaza conflict. While Iran's leaders have celebrated and praised the attacks on Israeli citizens, Iran's foreign ministry has downplayed its role, saying that the accusations are based on political reasons. The US has noted that although it does not have intelligence or evidence pointing to Iran's direct participation, Iran is complicit in the attacks. The Biden administration has discussed the deployment of US military ships and aircraft closer to Israel, and has pledged ongoing support for Israel. If the war spreads further and Washington imposes tougher restrictions, Iranian oil production could come under pressure. Some analysts have put Iranian crude production at more than 3 million barrels a day and exports above 2 million barrels a day, the highest levels since the Trump administration pulled the US out of the Iranian nuclear accord in 2018. White House says Biden's remark on photos of children was intended to underscore the utter depravity of Hamas attack. CNN. The White House has defended President Joe Biden's graphic description of the horrors in Israel, saying that the intention was to highlight the utter depravity of the Hamas attack on civilians. Biden had described seeing pictures of terrorists beheading children, although an administration official later clarified that the president's remarks were based on public comments from media outlets and Israeli officials, and that neither Biden nor the administration had seen the pictures or confirmed reports themselves. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later showed Secretary of State Antony Blinken photos of burned and blood-stained infants, which Blinken described as almost defying comprehension. The White House said that Biden's comments underscored the barbaric nature of the Hamas attacks and the need to support Israel. Israeli official hits back at Trump's shameful comments about attack. The Independent. Israel's communications minister, Shlomo Karhi, has criticized former U.S. President Donald Trump for his comments following the recent Hamas terror attacks. Trump claimed that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu let us down by not participating in an attack against Iranian Gen Qasem Soleimani. Karhi described Trump's remarks as shameful and accused him of spreading propaganda. The comments by Trump sharply contrasted with President Joe Biden's support for Israel. The White House has stated that 27 Americans have been killed in the attacks, with 14 Americans still unaccounted for. Trump wildly claims Biden may be on drugs in rambling speech. The Independent. Donald Trump made a speech in which he accused Joe Biden of being unable to speak and getting groggy after taking drugs that wear off. He referenced an incident where Biden appeared confused about how to exit the stage and a press conference where Biden's microphone was cut off. Trump also made a sarcastic comment about the cocaine found in the White House earlier this year. Biden's team has repeatedly denied accusations that his age is affecting his capacity as president. Blinken speaks about graphic photos from Hamas attacks. The Independent. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has described images of babies killed in Hamas attacks as simply depravity in the worst imaginable way. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office shared photos of the infants, including one riddled with bullets, with Blinken during his visit to Tel Aviv. Blinken said the images were beyond what anyone would ever want to imagine, much less actually see, and, God forbid, experience. He said the attacks against Israeli civilians showed a moment of moral clarity, and called on the international community to unite in expressing revulsion, disgust, and a determination not to allow this to go forward. The Israeli military claims more than 1,200 people have been killed since Hamas militants attacked Israel on June 4, and 27 Americans are among the dead. Israel has responded with air strikes that have killed at least 1,400 Palestinians, including 447 children, and has ordered a complete siege of Gaza. Blinken reinforced President Joe Biden's commitment to standing with Israel, and said the U.S. would support the country's evolving needs. Blinken invokes Jewish ancestry in address to grieving Israeli public. Washington Post. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has invoked his Jewish ancestry in a speech in Tel Aviv, expressing solidarity with the Israeli people. Blinken's visit to Israel comes as the country faces renewed criticism over its handling of the crisis in Gaza. The U.S. diplomat also confirmed that one of his aides would stay in Israel to help negotiate the release of U.S. hostages, who are believed to number in excess of 100. Biden to release his supplemental funding plan next week, White House says. Reuters. President Joe Biden will release a supplemental funding request next week, which will include additional money for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and the U.S. southern border. The request is expected to face some resistance from Republicans who oppose tying aid for both Israel and Ukraine together. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your trusted observer from the sixth dimension. Today, we have covered a range of news stories that highlight the ongoing domestic and international challenges facing President Joe Biden. Despite the flames abroad, Biden has kept one eye on the home front, focusing on his domestic agenda and addressing economic policies and job creation. He understands that voters are primarily concerned with pocketbook issues, and will decide his re-election based on domestic policies. In the midst of this, a crisis in Gaza has led to a growing number of U.S. citizens being held hostage by Hamas. President Biden has made it clear that the safety of Americans is his highest priority, but there are no plans for a rescue mission at this time. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump has faced criticism for his comments praising Hezbollah and criticizing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump's remarks have been called shameful and dangerous by both Israel and the White House. On the home front, Texas has paid a private company $75 million to transport migrants out of the state and into sanctuary cities across the country. While this has provided support to overwhelmed border communities, some cities are reaching capacity and have requested federal assistance. Additionally, President Biden's devotion to Israel could face a new test if Israel launches an incursion into Gaza. For now, Biden has offered vague admonitions for Israel to follow the rules of war, but his commitment to Israel may be tested if the situation worsens. In terms of the economy, the White House has asked executives to be prepared to discuss the state of the U.S. economy, which has shown signs of strain. Consumer prices have remained firm and employee pay has declined. A Gallup survey also shows that respondents believe Republicans would do a better job of keeping the country prosperous than Democrats. The Biden administration is facing challenges on both the domestic and international fronts, but they are actively working to strengthen the economy and address these concerns. As always, I invite you, my esteemed viewers, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these news stories? Do you have any insights or perspectives to share? The sixth dimension is open for discussion, so please join in and let your voices be heard. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6 Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6 team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6 Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6 Brief via email.